Detective Marcus Thompson had served the Chicago Police Department for 28 years with unwavering dedication. At 52, his weathered face told stories of countless nights patrolling dangerous neighborhoods, investigating homicides, and protecting citizens who would never know his name. His record was impeccable: 3 commendations for bravery, dozens of solved cases, and not a single complaint of excessive force in nearly 3 decades of service. Marcus had risen through the ranks from beat cop to detective through hard work and integrity, earning the respect of colleagues across all levels of the department. Born in the south side of Chicago, Marcus had witnessed firsthand the challenges facing urban communities. His decision to join the police force stemmed from a genuine desire to make a difference in his neighborhood, to be part of the solution rather than standing on the sidelines. Over the years, he had mentored dozens of rookie officers, teaching them not just the technical aspects of police work, but the importance of treating every citizen with dignity and respect, regardless of their circumstances. On a cold Tuesday morning in March, Marcus was driving to the courthouse to testify in a robbery case when his life took an unexpected turn. The traffic light ahead turned red, and he stopped his personal vehicle, a modest Honda Civic, behind a line of cars. What happened next would challenge everything he believed about justice and the system he had devoted his life to serving. Officer Jake Morrison, 26 years old and fresh out of the academy, was conducting what his training sergeant had called proactive policing. Morrison had been on the force for only 8 months, eager to prove himself and make arrests that would advance his career. Coming from a suburban background, Morrison had limited experience with diverse communities and carried unconscious biases that his brief academy training had failed to adequately address. He had heard veterans talk about developing instincts, about knowing when something was wrong just by looking at a situation. Today, he thought he felt that instinct kicking in. Morrison's shift supervisor, Sergeant Davis, had been pressuring younger officers to increase their arrest numbers, suggesting that proactive stops and aggressive enforcement were the keys to career advancement. This pressure created an environment where officers felt compelled to make arrests, sometimes without sufficient cause, in order to meet unofficial quotas and gain recognition from their superiors. Morrison noticed the Honda Civic with tinted windows and immediately ran the license plate. The system showed the vehicle was registered to Marcus Thompson, with an address in a neighborhood that Morrison's sergeant had labeled as high crime. What Morrison didn't see in his hasty check was the notation indicating Thompson was a police officer. The computer system required an additional query to reveal employment details, a step Morrison skipped in his rush to make what he believed would be a significant arrest. The irony was palpable. Marcus had actually been instrumental in developing the very protocols that Morrison was now ignoring. 3 years earlier, Marcus had served on a departmental committee that recommended mandatory verification procedures for exactly these types of situations. The committee's recommendations had been implemented on paper but were often overlooked in practice due to time pressures and inadequate training. When the light turned green, Morrison followed the Honda for 3 blocks before activating his emergency lights. Marcus pulled over immediately, confused but cooperative. He had been through countless traffic stops from the other side and knew the drill. As he sat waiting for the officer to approach, Marcus reviewed the morning in his mind, trying to understand what might have prompted the stop. His vehicle registration was current, he hadn't been speeding, and he had obeyed all traffic signals. The stop seemed completely random, which concerned him given his experience investigating complaints of racial profiling within the department. Marcus thought about his own son, David, who was about the same age as the approaching officer. David had graduated from Northwestern University 2 years earlier and was now working as a social worker in the same communities where Marcus had spent his career as a police officer. The generational contrast wasn't lost on Marcus as he watched the young officer approach his vehicle with obvious nervousness and aggression. Morrison approached the vehicle with his hand resting on his service weapon, his heart racing with adrenaline. Through the partially open window, he could see Marcus was an older black man wearing a simple jacket and baseball cap. What Morrison couldn't see was the detective shield in Marcus's wallet or the service weapon secured in the center console with proper permits. "License and registration," Morrison demanded, his voice carrying an edge that Marcus immediately recognized as nervous aggression. Marcus moved slowly, announcing each action as he reached for his wallet. "I'm reaching for my license in my back pocket," he said calmly. using the same de-escalation techniques he had taught rookie officers for years. As Marcus handed over his documents, Morrison noticed what appeared to be the outline of a weapon under Marcus's jacket. It was actually Marcus's cell phone in his inside pocket, but Morrison's inexperience and heightened state of alert made him misinterpret the shape. "Step out of the vehicle immediately," Morrison ordered, his voice rising. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Marcus felt a familiar knot forming in his stomach. He had seen this scenario play out too many times from his position as a detective investigating officer-involved incidents. He knew that sudden movements or arguments could escalate the situation dangerously. Despite his 2 decades of experience and authority, in this moment, he was just another citizen at the mercy of a nervous rookie cop. "Officer, I need to inform you that I am a detective with the Chicago Police Department," Marcus said calmly, stepping out of his vehicle with his hands clearly visible. "My identification is in my wallet, and I have a service weapon in the vehicle with proper permits." Morrison's training had covered scenarios where suspects claimed to be law enforcement officers, often as a ruse to gain advantage or escape custody. His sergeant had specifically warned about criminals who carried fake badges or claimed false credentials. Instead of verifying Marcus's claim, Morrison interpreted it as a red flag indicating deception. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," Morrison commanded, reaching for his handcuffs. Marcus felt the cold metal click around his wrists, a sensation he had experienced only once before during a training exercise 25 years earlier. The irony was not lost on him that after spending his career placing handcuffs on others, he was now experiencing the vulnerability and helplessness that came with being restrained. Morrison's backup arrived within minutes. 2 officers who had responded to his call for assistance with a suspicious individual, possibly impersonating a police officer. Neither of the backup officers took the time to verify Marcus's credentials or run a proper background check. They were operating under Morrison's narrative that Marcus was likely a criminal attempting to deceive law enforcement. Marcus was transported to the district station in the back of a patrol car, the same station where he had reported for duty thousands of times over the past 3 decades. As they pulled into the parking lot, Marcus saw colleagues he had worked with for years, but none of them recognized him in the back of the patrol car. The tinted windows of the police vehicle and his position as a detained suspect made him invisible to the very people who knew him best. The booking process was surreal for Marcus. He was photographed, fingerprinted, and placed in a holding cell while officers processed paperwork that described him as a suspected impersonator and possible armed criminal. His repeated attempts to explain his identity were dismissed as the desperate lies of someone trying to avoid prosecution. The desk sergeant, who had transferred from another district just months earlier, didn't recognize Marcus's name or face. During the booking process, Marcus noticed several procedural violations that he would have documented in his own reports. The officers failed to properly catalog his personal effects, didn't follow proper evidence handling procedures for his service weapon, and rushed through the paperwork without conducting thorough background checks. These same shortcuts and oversights that Marcus had spent his career trying to eliminate were now being used against him. The holding cell contained 4 other individuals: a young man arrested for shoplifting, an elderly homeless veteran detained for loitering, a woman charged with driving under the influence, and a teenager picked up for truancy. As Marcus listened to their stories, he recognized the common themes of poverty, mental health issues, and systemic failures that had driven many of the cases he had investigated over the years. The experience gave him a new perspective on the human cost of the criminal justice system. Meanwhile, Marcus's absence from court was causing problems for the prosecution team. Assistant District Attorney Sarah Chen had been preparing for months to present the robbery case, and Marcus's testimony was crucial for securing a conviction. The case involved a series of armed robberies targeting elderly residents in Marcus's district, and his methodical investigation had identified the perpetrator through careful analysis of security footage and witness interviews. Without his testimony, months of investigative work would be wasted, and a dangerous criminal might go free. Chen had worked with Marcus on over 40 cases during her 5-year career as a prosecutor. She knew him to be one of the most reliable and professional officers in the department, someone who always arrived early for court appearances and was thoroughly prepared to testify. His unexplained absence was completely out of character and immediately raised red flags for the prosecution team. The defense attorney in the robbery case, sensing an opportunity, began arguing for dismissal of charges due to prosecutorial failure to produce their key witness. The judge, while sympathetic to the prosecution's dilemma, was bound by legal requirements to ensure defendants received timely trials. The clock was ticking on the case, and each hour that passed without Marcus's testimony strengthened the defense's position. The investigation into Marcus's whereabouts revealed a bureaucratic nightmare that highlighted serious communication failures within the department. His immediate supervisor showed him as active and on duty, but no one could locate him. His phone went straight to voicemail as it had been confiscated during his arrest and was sitting in an evidence locker 3 floors below where his colleagues were searching for him. His family had not heard from him since he left for court that morning, which was unusual but not yet alarming enough to trigger a missing person report. Marcus's wife, Janet, a nurse at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, began to worry when he failed to call during his usual lunch break. After 30 years of marriage, she knew his routines intimately. Marcus always called to check in during long court days, both to update her on his schedule and to hear about her patients. When her calls went directly to voicemail without any explanation, Janet knew something was seriously wrong. Janet contacted Detective Rodriguez, whom she had met at numerous department social functions over the years. Rodriguez assured her that Marcus was probably just tied up in court testimony and had forgotten to charge his phone, an explanation that would have been plausible for almost anyone except Marcus, who was notoriously meticulous about communication and preparation. Hours passed in the holding cell as Marcus sat among individuals he might have arrested in different circumstances. The irony of the situation was profound, but Marcus maintained his composure, drawing on the patience and resilience that had sustained him through decades of police work. He observed the other detainees, recognizing in their stories the same frustrations with the system that he was now experiencing firsthand. The young shoplifter, barely 18 years old, reminded Marcus of his nephew Tony, who had struggled with minor infractions during his teenage years. Marcus had used his influence to get Tony into a youth mentorship program, rather than the juvenile justice system, an intervention that had helped turn the young man's life around. Now, watching this teenager face the same crossroads, Marcus wondered how many other young people might have benefited from alternatives to arrest and prosecution. The homeless veteran, a man named William who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan, suffered from untreated PTSD and had been cycling through the criminal justice system for minor offenses related to his mental health condition. Marcus recognized William's story from dozens of similar cases he had encountered throughout his career. The lack of adequate mental health services and veteran support programs created a revolving door that criminalized conditions that should have been treated medically. As the hours passed, Marcus found himself serving as an informal counselor to his fellow detainees, listening to their stories and offering advice based on his years of experience with the legal system. The experience reinforced his belief that many individuals in the criminal justice system were there due to circumstances beyond their control, rather than malicious intent. The breakthrough came when Detective Linda Rodriguez, Marcus's partner of 12 years, realized something was seriously wrong. Marcus had never missed court without calling, and his failure to respond to radio calls was completely out of character. Rodriguez had joined the force as a rookie when Marcus was already a seasoned detective, and he had served as her mentor during those crucial early years. She knew his habits, his reliability, and his dedication better than anyone in the department. Rodriguez began calling other districts, hospitals, and eventually the arrest database, searching for any trace of her missing partner. Her systematic approach reflected the investigative skills that Marcus had taught her during their partnership. She started with the most likely explanations, mechanical problems with his vehicle or a medical emergency, before moving to less probable scenarios. When Rodriguez discovered that a Marcus Thompson had been arrested that morning for impersonating a police officer, she initially assumed it was a case of mistaken identity involving someone with the same name. The Chicago area had several individuals named Marcus Thompson, and clerical errors were not uncommon in the database system. It wasn't until she requested the booking photo that she realized the devastating truth. The department had arrested one of its own veteran detectives. Rodriguez's reaction was immediate and visceral. She had worked alongside Marcus on some of the department's most challenging cases, had seen him risk his life to protect citizens and fellow officers, and had witnessed his unwavering commitment to justice and professional standards. The idea that he could be sitting in a holding cell, treated as a common criminal, was both absurd and infuriating. Rodriguez immediately contacted Captain Williams, who had supervised Marcus for 8 years and knew his record intimately. Williams' reaction was a mixture of disbelief, anger, and embarrassment. The department had failed to protect one of its most respected officers, and the incident would undoubtedly become a public relations nightmare once the media learned the details. The rush to release Marcus and rectify the situation began immediately, but the legal system moves slowly, even when correcting its own mistakes. Marcus had already been processed into the system, and his release required paperwork, approvals, and coordination between multiple departments. What should have been a simple verification of his identity had become an hours-long ordeal involving supervisors, union representatives, and legal advisors. By the time the paperwork was complete, Marcus had spent 7 hours in custody. The psychological impact of the experience was significant, even for someone with his extensive law enforcement background. He had experienced the system from the perspective of those he had arrested, feeling the powerlessness and frustration that comes with being disbelieved and dismissed by the very institution he had served faithfully. The 7 hours had felt like 7 days to Marcus. Time moved differently when you were powerless, when your fate was in the hands of others who seemed indifferent to your protests of innocence. He had always tried to process arrests quickly and treat suspects with dignity. But now he understood viscerally how even a few hours of wrongful detention could feel like an eternity. During his time in custody, Marcus had mentally cataloged numerous procedural failures and civil rights violations that he witnessed. The experience would later inform his recommendations for departmental reforms, but in the moment, it simply reinforced his growing understanding of how the system looked from the other side. He thought about the thousands of individuals he had arrested over his career and wondered how many had been innocent or had been treated more harshly than necessary. The incident report documenting Marcus's arrest filled 17 pages and detailed a cascade of failures in communication, training, and procedure. Officer Morrison had failed to properly verify the suspect's identity. Backup officers had failed to conduct independent assessments of the situation, and desk personnel had failed to recognize one of their own department's veteran detectives. The report would later become required reading at the police academy as an example of how multiple small failures could combine to create a major injustice. The internal investigation revealed that Morrison had received minimal training on de-escalation techniques and cultural sensitivity, despite policing in one of the most diverse cities in America. His supervisors had emphasized arrest statistics over community relationship building, creating an environment where officers felt pressured to act aggressively rather than thoughtfully. The backup officers who had responded to Morrison's call had simply accepted his assessment of the situation without conducting their own evaluation. This failure of independent judgment reflected a departmental culture that discouraged questioning fellow officers, even when circumstances seemed unusual or suspicious. Captain Williams personally drove to the detention facility to escort Marcus out, but the damage was already done. News of the arrest had begun circulating through the department, and rumors were spreading about the circumstances. Some officers expressed outrage at the treatment of a respected colleague, while others questioned whether Marcus had somehow provoked the situation or failed to properly identify himself. The story reached the media within days, as these stories inevitably do in the age of social media and police transparency initiatives. Local news stations picked up the story of the veteran detective arrested by his own department, and the narrative quickly gained traction as a symbol of broader issues within law enforcement training and accountability. Marcus's court appearance the following week was unlike anything he had experienced in his career. Instead of testifying as the investigating officer in a criminal case, he found himself standing before Judge Patricia Hawkins as the victim of a wrongful arrest. Judge Hawkins, a former prosecutor who had worked with Marcus on dozens of cases over the years, was visibly disturbed by the circumstances that had brought him before her court. "Detective Thompson," Judge Hawkins said, reviewing the case file with obvious concern, "I have had the privilege of observing your work in my courtroom for over 15 years. Your reputation for professionalism and integrity is well established in this courthouse." She paused, looking directly at Marcus. "The fact that you were subjected to this treatment is deeply troubling and reflects serious systemic failures that must be addressed." Judge Hawkins's recognition of Marcus's service record was more than a professional courtesy. It was a validation of his career and character that helped restore some of the dignity that had been stripped away during his arrest. Her public acknowledgement of his exemplary service sent a clear message about the injustice he had suffered and the respect he deserved from the legal community. The judge ordered a comprehensive review of the arrest procedures and mandated additional training for all officers involved in the incident. She also recommended that the department implement new protocols for verifying the identity of individuals claiming to be law enforcement officers, including mandatory database checks and supervisor confirmation before making arrests. Officer Morrison faced disciplinary action ranging from additional training to possible suspension, depending on the findings of the internal investigation. His career prospects dimmed significantly as the incident became a case study in what not to do during a traffic stop. The backup officers received formal reprimands for failing to independently verify the situation before supporting Morrison's actions. For Marcus, the incident marked a turning point in his perspective on policing and justice. He had always believed in the system despite its flaws, but experiencing it from the other side had opened his eyes to vulnerabilities and prejudices he had previously only understood intellectually. The 7 hours in custody had given him insights that 28 years on the force had not provided. The wrongful arrest also sparked important conversations within the department about implicit bias, proper procedures, and the treatment of suspects. Marcus became an unexpected advocate for reform, using his experience to train younger officers about the importance of thorough investigation and the dangers of assumptions based on appearance or circumstances. Months later, Marcus reflected on the incident as both a personal ordeal and a professional learning experience. The arrest had been traumatic and unjust, but it had also provided him with a unique perspective that made him a better officer and a more empathetic human being. Judge Hawkins's recognition of his service had helped heal some of the wounds, but the real resolution came from his decision to use the experience to improve the system he had devoted his life to serving. The case became a landmark example of the importance of proper procedures, ongoing training, and the recognition that even experienced officers can find themselves on the wrong side of the law through no fault of their own. Marcus's service record, ultimately recognized and honored by Judge Hawkins, stood as a testament to the possibility of justice prevailing, even when the system fails its most dedicated servants.